All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar in this series sponsored by Flywire. Today's session is all about entrepreneurs, and we're going to be talking to three entrepreneurs with very different backgrounds in different disciplines across real estate and hospitality. We're going to talk about how the pandemic has affected their businesses, the opportunities and the challenges it's presented, and how they're looking to the future. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media, and we are an online publisher of B2B news sites for the hospitality industry, and we're also an events organizer. Now, these sessions are sponsored by Flywire. Flywire is a global payments enablement and software company on a mission to deliver the world's most important and complex payments. If you'd like to find out more about them, you can see some contact details in the chat, and their web address is displayed on your screen now. So this webinar is going to last an hour. We'd like to make it as interactive as possible, so after our Q&A, we'd love you to submit your questions using the Q&A function in Zoom. We're going to probably have 10 minutes or so to get around to Q&A at the end. Everybody who was registered for the session will receive a recording via email in the next couple of days. So we've got a great panel of entrepreneurs joining us today, and I'm going to ask the three of them in turn to give us a bit of background to their careers and then to the companies that they have recently founded and they're working at now. And I'll go from left to right as we see you on the screen. So László, welcome to you. Would you like to kick off, please?
Yes, hi there. Yeah, so originally I'm from Budapest, Hungary. I was trained as an architect in London at UCL. And then during a number of years, I worked as an architect in London, Barcelona, Zurich, several countries across Europe. And then eventually I went client side and became an executive at Google. So I was working as, my title was campus architect in Silicon Valley. So I was working on sort of the large corporate real estate expansion strategies and also execution of Google's portfolio, basically, both mainly in California, in Mountain View and Sunnyvale and around, but was also involved in a number of international projects. And then in 2018, I decided to move back to Europe and co-founded together with an old Portuguese friend of mine in Lisbon. I co-founded a company called Heden, which is a co-working brand, in December 2020. So in the midst of the pandemic being in full swing, it's in Lisbon as well, that she closed our first investment round with a Portuguese Brazilian venture capital and real estate fund. And now we are, and as part of that investment as well, we ended up spinning out another part of the company, which is called Spaceworks. So the way we look at it is that Heden is basically sort of space experience and curation brand, and Spaceworks is the digital space management and design component to that. So we effectively run two parallel companies and kind of, look to the synergies, and our clients are, increasingly we saw that clients are also looking for not just an immediate offer as a co-work, but also for their helping to define their strategy going forward when they, for example, move to Lisbon from the US or from the UK or elsewhere. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, László. Cindy, would you like to give us some background into you and your company, please?
Yeah, well, that's a hard nut to follow. So my name is Cindy Diffenderfer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Orion Haus. We are an Airbnb or home sharing friendly building property manager and enterprise software solution. My background, I've been in the short-term rental, long-term rental space now for the last 6 years. Former companies, what I'm still an owner but not operator of, is Nativo, which is a luxury condo brand also that is short-term rental friendly. And then Nido, which was launched in partnership with Airbnb. Prior to that, I actually worked in the hospitality space on the vendor side. So I had a keg wine company, draft beer, in the craft beer craze. We launched that and exited that around 2010. And then prior to that, I was in the fashion industry. So serial entrepreneur, but very much ingrained in lifestyle industries that kind of suited where my interests were. And I've really found my passion here in, creating flexible living and working solutions. And, it's afforded me and my family and friends, a nice way to live. And we continue to, hopefully expand that so that others could experience the same.
Thanks, Cindy. And finally, Leo, over to you.
Hi, yeah, we started IMS, myself and my business partner Shane started IMS in 2003. And we began offering tech services into student accommodation, would you believe, at the start. That was our first foray into managed service, into it was hardwired at the time, not Wi-Fi. And over the years, we evolved into more hospitality oriented, and in most recent times into service departments, apart hotels, and co-living and build to rent. So it's been a very interesting journey. We now are offering our services throughout Ireland, the UK, and Europe. We're flying on the coattails of some really good apart hotel operators in particular. Some of our key clients are in Switzerland, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, as well as the UK and Ireland. And I guess our mission is to make our customers' lives easier. Our customers being the operators of multi-tenant or multi-family accommodation, and whether it be in traditional hospitality or most recently co-living and build-to-rent areas. Yeah, and that's what we do.
Okay, thanks, Leo. Let's stick with you for a moment, Leo. As we emerge from the pandemic, albeit more slowly than we would have liked, it's becoming quite a drawn-out process. What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for your business?
The biggest challenge, it's a good question, because the pandemic itself was a massive challenge. And at the same time, opportunistic for us, because it gave us time to reassess and re-examine the markets we were in. We were very heavily focused on hospitality pre-pandemic, and we were just starting to look at the BTR markets and the co-living markets, and we signed our first deal for co-living schemes in Ireland, and we were negotiating with BTR schemes as well. So it really made us look at diversifying our portfolio, and at the same time trying to help our existing hospitality clients. We're a Zoom partner, so we put all our management teams right across all the properties on Zoom licenses so that they could keep the ship afloat, and we pivoted into the health and the education sectors to help them out as well. So it was a really interesting time, and we got to know ourselves again, if you like. And the challenges on this side now is, for us, the two main challenges are getting product. It's a real challenge trying to get product and staff. We're seeing that we're trying to recruit, and we're having to stockpile for jobs that are 12 months down the line at the moment, and we're also trying to recruit, and the recruitment process, we're finding it very difficult to find staff. So they're the two key challenges, because I guess when we came out of pandemic, a lot of projects that we were involved in were put on hold. Suddenly they are going 100 miles an hour. And those projects, they want them done yesterday. And so we have that product problem, that staffing problem, and just trying not to put too much workload on our staff and our current resources, while trying to get more, basically. So that's the biggest challenge for us.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. Cindy, maybe if I can direct the same question to you, the biggest challenges and opportunities you're currently facing.
You know, they are shifting constantly, but I will say, you know, early on in COVID, I have to agree and resonate with Leo talking about inventory. We had an enormous pipeline set up, you know, call it February of 2020. New delivery product, existing inventory that we were converting into the flexible housing solutions. And all of that, even though it was a really big initiative for some of our institutional partners, really got put on the back burner. And they said, look, we are so focused right now on rent collections and, you know, eviction moratoriums and all the different things that occurred here stateside, that we can't look at new initiatives, of which flexible living and home sharing friendly buildings is really disruptive to the nature of traditional multifamily. So, you know, a year ago, that was really our biggest challenge. Now, we have got a massive influx of inventory from our partnership side, a lot of institutional inventory. We've got a lot of depressed hotel inventory that's looking to convert into multifamily that is, you know, under optimized and probably overbuilt in some of these markets. And then we've got massive inbound demand now from consumers that tried vacation rentals during COVID that were traditionally hotel travelers. So now they've opened their eyes and they go, oh my God, this is great. I can get an apartment versus staying in a hotel, and I can take my family and we're staying for longer periods of time. So, you know, it really went from, in this case, famine to feast. So from our perspective, we're spending a lot of time, you know, creating institutional and programmatic solutions that we can onboard large swaths of inventory while still maintaining consistency on the customer service and the brand side of the equation. That said, you know, we're rolling out slowly because we've got to make it, break it, and fix it as we introduce new buildings and new inventories to each market. So it was the hurry up and wait, and now the hurry up and deliver, and everything that kind of that feeds into that frenzy.
And are you experiencing similar issues with recruitment? I know in the UK and Ireland, it's a problem across all sectors. Is that echoed on your side of the pond?
You know, the absolute answer is absolutely yes, right? And it really depends on the sector of which we're hiring. And I hate to use the term unskilled labor, but, you know, kind of our hourly employees that are front desk or maintenance or groundskeepers, you know, those people that really make our business run, we find the hardest to employ right now. And we are all speculating as to why, but we definitely have a shortage on the supply, you know, for hiring on that scope. And then on the flip side, for more managerial and executive level staffing, the competition has become much greater. You know, we really have to have a point of difference where it isn't just compensation, where it's quality of living and benefits and flexibility, things that people have become accustomed to through COVID. We have to kind of tailor now our job offerings to, you know, the lifestyle that people are now enjoying and want to continue enjoying, and meeting a balance there. You know, I mean, we're all about flexibility and home sharing and working remotely, but the pendulum swung a little bit far, you know, where we got people a little too comfortable and they're in the homes, the dogs and the kids are in the meetings and all of that stuff. So right now we've got to get our balance back, where it's like there's got to be a sense of office decorum no matter where you are. But yeah, we are experiencing all of those, the same challenges. You know, we are largely, well, exclusively America right now. So I know every country has got its own set of challenges from all different viewpoints, certainly with, you know, how the financial structuring was done for COVID packages and, you know, employment benefits, and then, you know, housing concessions and all that stuff. So, you know, we're just navigating the minefield right now to figure out what the world looks like on the other side.
Thanks, Cindy. And László, does anything that Cindy and Leo have said resonate with you in terms of challenges and opportunities? And are there any additional ones you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I'd say that, you know, on our end as well, staffing and scaling for our businesses is definitely a challenge as well post the pandemic. So it's, you know, very much the exact same things. Obviously, you know, Lisbon is sort of a smaller market and a smaller smaller scale overall what we're doing as well. But yeah, very similar. We also had sort of with the entry also of the investors, we sort of had a pretty ambitious pipeline, and then then you have to sort of readjust to the new realities post pandemic to that. And then the other thing I would say from our perspective as well is that the kind of the really big challenge as well is also to help the customers who are coming to us, of which there is no short supply, but really help them redefine this new hybrid, right? Everyone's now starting to use all these buzzwords, and they sort of show up on your doors and say like, hey, what we want is a hybrid work solution. What do you got? And you have to make them realize that whatever they mean by hybrid might not be what they've read in the New York Times hybrid is, or so there's a lot of that kind of getting down into the weeds with the clients and really helping them reassess their new realities and the reality that they're finding themselves within. So I think that's definitely a big challenge as well.
Let's pick up on one of the things you mentioned there, which is investor sentiment. How have you found investor sentiment to your business and to your market space in general? Investment and lending, has that evolved as the pandemic has progressed?
Yeah, I mean, we were again in a sort of very lucky and privileged position. We were sort of small enough where we didn't have to sort of have the worries of a WeWork in the middle of a pandemic, but big enough already that we also, we had kind of customers and enterprise clients who took the long view, right? So we never had sort of a catastrophic sort of drying up of revenue, even at the full lockdown. So we sort of knew that we were relatively safe as a business getting through it, including, as I mentioned, right, like actually closing an investment round during the pandemic. So I would say that generally, sentiment in Lisbon is very positive and very strong, because Lisbon was also just one of those places that kind of sailed through the pandemic by and large, or well, the real estate sector. I'm sure, there's a lot of people in certain areas of society who suffered a lot or who continue to suffer, and there was a lot of repercussions across society and the job market, etc. But real estate specifically just held very, very strong in Lisbon. I think it's one of the top 4 places in the world where values just held, and obviously it's sort of reflected in also our business. And then what we're finding, the minute sort of the full lockdown was over, demand is kind of through the roof. It's right back to where it was, even bigger, but now more complex and more diversified, which goes back to that point that now you really need to be sort of a true partner to the client to help them define what they really want from a workspace, right? It's no longer a given that it's an office and a desk and a chair and there you go, like that's it, right? You really need to kind of hold their hand or sort of co-create with them the experience and the actual sort of service offering and the product that you're selling to them, because they have a lot, everyone has just a lot more questions that dig a lot more deeper. There's a lot of sort of existential rethinking for the companies themselves, and that gets reflected back to how they interact with us and how they talk to us.
We'll come back in a minute to talk about how you've had to reevaluate your offer and what clients are asking for. But first, I just want to ask Cindy what your experience has been of your conversations with investors and how they've seen the pandemic progress and their confidence in your sector and your model.
It's been a mixed bag. There was so much concern around the master lease short-term rental business model with companies like the Guild and Sonder and Stay Alfred and Lyric and all these guys that had a lot of inventory with a lot of liability on it. And so immediately when that demand dried up, unlike László's commercial clients, these are consumer clients that are going in and just not traveling anymore. And they had this massive burden of those lease obligations. So there was a real fear as many of those companies started just falling off, right? They couldn't service the debt, they couldn't service their leases. They were in a very strong financial position at the beginning of the pandemic, and then everything just was brought to a standstill. So investors were scared, quite frankly, to look at short-term rentals, much like the hotel institutional capital, where they go, hotels also are a victim of circumstance when it comes to the seasonality as well as the pandemics, and then the mandates from the government position. Airbnb, I have to give them an enormous amount of credit for how they handled both their travelers and their host community, how they rebounded from pulling the IPO and then going out and really soaring and building that investor confidence and consumer confidence again. Now everybody's looking at it with a little bit of a conservative view, saying, well, what if this happens again? And we're in a unique position that we aren't reliant exclusively on short-term rental income. The first source of revenue that our company earns is from the monthly rent payment, of which rent collections maintained at 92 to 98% across America. So because we first collect rent and then secondarily allow those residents to do short-term rentals, our increased net operating income, that bump comes from the short-term rental piece. So we've got a much more stable business model, but we still kind of get bulked into just a traditional short-term renter. So there was that kind of conservative standpoint. Now, we just actually closed a round with some really strong investors that are hospitality and multifamily focused. They don't have the same level of fear as traditional venture capitalists, where you're looking at these crazy valuations that come tumbling down, and the volatility that buzz can create versus the stability that revenue maintains from an institutional multifamily perspective. So we went private equity and institutional capital versus venture capital, which has been a strength for us in that. But I would say, there was so much uncertainty. Airbnb just did an enormous favor, I think, to the entire short-term rental industry by really handling the pandemic well and coming out swinging and better and stronger and faster than all. And I think that trickle-down effect impacts us all really positively.
Mm-hmm. And as well as your investors, how have conversations been with building owners? Have they become more receptive to your model because you do have those twin income streams?
So the answer generally is yes. And then the second piece is, once they kind of get familiar with the business model, of which we do underwriting and we do design and software and technology and hardware integrations and all this stuff that kind of makes things work, the thought becomes, well, can I just do this myself and not pay for it? So there's the smaller guys that go, oh, we absolutely can't do this, but the more institutional partners kind of want to look up our skirt, figure out how it's done, and then replicate it, which we haven't yet seen great success in, but no doubt they will thrive. But the interest level is certainly there. The demand from the consumer is pushing them a lot faster than I think they'd like to move on their own. But certainly, the upside on the NOI is a key driver for the institutions. They get that. So a lot of demand, a lot of dating, but our better partners are smaller groups.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Cindy. Leo, you're obviously coming at this from a slightly different angle as a supplier to real estate and hospitality. How have the financial institutions that you deal with been through the course of the pandemic, whether it's lenders or investors or whoever?
It's been really interesting, George, because I guess in comparison to the recession of 2008 to 2010, this is a walk in the park in terms of lending investments, because there hasn't been a slack off in lending and investing. Whereas during recession time, coming out of the recession, it was a very different story. So what we're seeing is a lot of projects put on hold, but already financed, are in the process of being financed and ready to go as soon as the world opened up again. So we saw a fairly healthy attitude to investment coming out of the pandemic. And then I guess anecdotally, in terms of our clients who took the opportunity to upgrade their facilities during the pandemic, particularly in the hospitality world. So we were kept very busy with upgrades of tech that was probably overdue in certain hospitality groups. But there was a real openness to invest, knowing that they'd come out strong once the pandemic was over. So the comparison between recession and pandemic has been really interesting for us.
Mm-hmm. And are these upgrades possible while a building is trading piecemeal, or are these properties that were forced to close and decided to take that window of opportunity to get the work done?
Mostly closed properties on the traditional hospitality front chose to upgrade. A lot of our clients would have been maybe due an upgrade and had just been slow about upgrading tech, you know, the way that sometimes they like to sweat the asset, whereas we would like them to continuously, every 5-year cycle, tech in terms of Wi-Fi for sure needs to be upgraded. So yeah, it was very easy to upgrade then during close when those hotels were closed for business. It's also important, I guess, in the hospitality sector that there was a lot of financial help given by governments as well. So they weren't under as much pressure as you would imagine they might have been. And therefore they were in a position to come out strongly. And then in terms of the apart hotel sector, of course, the apart hotel sector and service apartments were just booming. And what we saw there was the need, and it's funny listening to the guys, that the change in attitudes, change in usage, change. If you take internet, for example, the bandwidth usage in an apartment block has gone through the roof with work from home and hybrid working. So there's been a real reality check as well amongst the operators to say, listen, this is what we need to give our people now. They're no longer just checking email or looking at Facebook or watching Netflix. They're now full on conferences, on college, kids at school. Everything needs to be perfect from it in terms of connectivity. So it's been fairly easy for us then. The conversation has been had by the world. It's fairly easy for us to go to one of our groups and say, you need to upgrade all your connectivity across the group up to this level as a given. Once you do that, then you can cater for every eventuality. So that's the need for investment is clear there as well.
Thanks, Leo. László, let's come back to you and talk about how changing ways of working might have forced you to reevaluate your offer to clients. You know, when a new company comes to you looking to take workspace, is their wish list very different from what it was a couple of years ago?
Yes, it definitely is. I'd say the main change, which I already alluded to previously, is that there is a lot of new clients who previously wouldn't even have contemplated co-working, right? It's you know, very similar to what Leo just described as well, where basically this hasn't really changed the paradigm of where the trajectory was already going, but it certainly accelerated things probably by 5 to 10 years or even more. Right, so there's a lot of companies now and enterprises who might have in 5 or 10 years time started to think about co-working or some type of sort of shared office space and some kind of hybrid solutions, and suddenly this has become an immediate reality for them. So that's, you know, clearly one part, and then hand in hand with that goes again a sort of diversifying and sort of a kind of new level of complexity to what their demands are and what their needs and requirements are relative to how they want their workforce to interact, whether within their own spaces and also in shared spaces that they're in. And again, this is where sort of, you know, this split and this kind of spin out of Spaceworks also, this is why it came about, because we started to understand that there's a lot of clients who are coming to us with a much more kind of, you know, with a much more kind of refined and redefined need, rather than just, hey, I need workspace for whatever 60 people. Do you guys have enough desks available, kind of thing, right? They immediately come with a request that goes, hey, we need workspace in Lisbon for 60 people in the next 6 months. And then we'll have to reevaluate, and from a year and a half from now we might be opening up our own offices. How can you help us, right? So it's a much more open-ended conversation now with them.
And have your experiences and learnings from the pandemic changed the way that you will design future buildings? I don't know, what is your pipeline for openings, and how will they differ from your existing building?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we have, even pre-pandemic, we were always betting on quality over quantity, just to put it a little bit crudely. And, you know, I mean, there is this level of sort of, right, per square meter per person, desk sizes, etc., etc. So that's, you know, that's where co-workings also differ a lot in the offering of what sort of the level of design that you put into it, what's the level of design thinking, and what kind of level of occupancies you're basically trying to drive within your portfolio, right? So what we've been doing pre-pandemic already was always erring on the side of actually being more generous, providing more open spaces, more circulation, wider corridors, all of this good stuff. So to be honest, actually the pandemic hasn't really impacted anything significantly. We've been, you know, we've just kind of carried on where we sort of left off. And indeed, you know, on most of our spaces, we didn't really have to intervene in any significant way, where, you know, there was a lot of co-working space that suddenly went like, wow, we have to completely redo the desk sizes, we have to rethink the layouts, we need to completely redo what we've been doing. So again, luckily we sort of were always kind of heading in a direction where you know, not that we ever expected such an eventuality or pandemic to hit, but sort of just naturally. And again, this is also based on my long experience working in this field and commercial real estate, and working at Google as well. We obviously, there was a lot of number crunching of how many square meters per person you should be having across a portfolio that was, you know, millions of square feet across the world. And let's say, you know, I've kind of learned my lessons along the way, and was always focused on quality with what we were doing at Heden.
And it's obviously a pretty lively building where you are now. We can see and hear people moving.
Yeah, it's pretty packed actually. Yeah, I'm having to sit here actually because all our rooms are taken. So actually,
that's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So what do you offer in terms of communal spaces that aren't strictly workspace?
I mean, you know, it's sort of the usual amenities. We have sort of a, you know, I can sort of swing the camera around, but we have kind of, you know, sort of a kitchen and breakout space. We have sort of the eating space, the ping pong table behind, there's an event space. So, you know, I would say sort of in the kind of very big picture, the way I look at it is that what the pandemic has really fostered and accelerated is this already ongoing convergence between commercial real estate, between hospitality and events specifically, right? So in this sort of whole new reality where it's not a given what the office is really there to do for any given company, right? People are really rethinking this, and the office has become much more of a sort of, you know, gathering space and a coming together space, more than necessarily just a sort of sitting at your desk and being there for, you know, 8 hours or however many in front of a screen and a computer. And I think there is, you know, a lot of stuff that we, you know, luckily intuitively already got right before the pandemic, that our space is pretty naturally sort of converged in this direction, or converted into this sort of new reality. But I'd say this is sort of the you know, it's kind of an ongoing daily almost conversation as well for the spaces that we have in the pipeline as well. But again, I would say, you know, in summary, we haven't really changed anything dramatically and didn't have to rethink, because we're already sort of on this path and going in this direction before.
And just quickly, for the benefit of those of us who are shivering in a grey Northern Europe, can you show us the view the other side?
Oh yeah, just you want to look at the riverfront.
Yeah, that's
it's pretty sunny out here. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you, László. Cindy, the rent to rent model, for want of a better term, what terminology you use, but and you can correct me if that's an inappropriate one, but it's a really interesting new concept. Are there any legislative barriers to it in the States, and if so, do they vary regionally? I know in a lot of buildings here in the UK, it would be termed subletting, and it wouldn't be allowed, but I get the impression things are freeing up a bit now. What's the situation with you?
Okay, that's a very loaded question. A lot of answers in that, but Yeah, there is a lot of legislation that's around it. Generally, in more densely populated areas like in New York and a San Francisco, Chicago, they'll have density caps on it saying, okay, only 25% of this building can participate in short-term rental activity. And generally, when that's written, it's targeted to maintain the affordable housing inventory so that people aren't taking these leases just for the sole purpose of running them as short-term rentals to do that, quote unquote, rental arbitrage. Mm-hmm. Our business is such that we go only into markets that and zones that we can actually operate. And cities like New York were just no-goes, basically, unless we went into something that was already a hospitality or a condo hotel product. That is changing now. Not that my company is going to approach it anytime soon, but the city itself, because there's just an enormous surplus of commercial, both retail and office space that is now sitting dormant and being repurposed and trying to figure out like what its next life is going to have. The city's starting to look at that in different ways. Like, could we turn that into flexible office and or living and or whatever? But traditionally, up until COVID, the answer was absolutely no, right? Anywhere there was a shortage of affordable housing, they really wanted to maintain that inventory dedicated exclusively to annual rentals. Outside of those real dense populated areas, we've got a lot of flexibility. So, what we've experienced through COVID is that America became a driving vacation community. So people were still vacationing. They just weren't flying to those destinations. So they were going for longer periods of time, and they were going to mountains and coastal communities and lakes and things of that nature. And those communities really embrace the short-term rental and long-term rental business models because they were impacted so much through seasonality. So the idea of being able to get your annual rent plus your high season peak rates is really attractive. Our geographic strategy has been focused primarily along coastal cities throughout the southeastern corridor of the United States. As you well know, this country is just huge, so you can drive for 20 hours and still be in the same state. So we really focus on those areas that had really been impacted seasonally, but had the demand now, through relocation and from longer term stays and from flexible working, that inventory was being absorbed year round. So I think legislation will catch up. It's really written to tell you what you can't do versus what you can do. From the building owner's perspective, it's typically ingrained in the lease, and that's where that restriction comes from. It's not necessarily dictated by the municipality. In some cases it is, in other cases it's not. So it really, loaded question, because every single building in every city block is zoned and treated differently.
And do you restrict how many nights your customers can dedicate their units to short-term rentals, your year-round clients?
Yep.
And are you seeing any trends in that direction? What is the average?
So we've got, it depends on the building. So we've got buildings that are really prime for short-term rentals, meaning there's an appreciable difference between the amount of rent that they're paying on a monthly basis and what the potential earnings are on the short-term rental basis. So those are the markets that what we call professional hosts want to lease in. So we'll dedicate a certain amount of inventory, call it 8 or 10% for professional hosts. The remaining 90% of our inventory would be allocated to primary residents. But it really depends on that travel demand, because you're paying $3,000 a month in rent, and the average daily rate is $180. You can't really make a spread that's profitable on that, even dedicated full time. So those buildings are just by nature going to be traditional full-time residents. And then when they travel on the weekends or for the holidays, they'll monetize their home when they're away. We don't put caps in the activity. We do create modules and tools, revenue management tools for our residents, so that they can, optimize their earning potential and on peak seasons or peak weekends, if there's a festival that's in town or, sporting events or any of that stuff. So we give them the tools, but they really manage their calendar. we limit the number of units that any professional host could take in a building, and we also cap that allocated inventory. So we do our best to maintain inventory for traditional housing, while still also affording the upside of the seasonal or peak season revenue opportunities.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Leo, how have your customer requirements changed over the course of the pandemic? We spoke briefly about upgrades there. And have you noticed any significant differences between the different asset classes that you're active in? So your service departments, your co-living and so on.
Yeah, I guess in the student accommodation part of our portfolio, there's been significant changes in the usage because of online learning and online teaching. And funnily enough, the data tells a lot of stories. The data, for example, Microsoft Teams takes more bandwidth than Zoom, would you believe? And whether a college with the student village, if their policy is to use Teams, we're needing to give more bandwidth into the student villages around that college, whereas it's not the same with Zoom. So it's all been really about bandwidth and making sure that the connected network is able to cater for the increase in devices as well. So you've now got people, you can see the students of today, they're on 3 devices at the one time. I don't know how they do it. I see my own kids, they're studying apparently with YouTube on another screen and Netflix on the third screen. And the amount of devices and usage in the student accommodation world is very significant. But we're seeing that right through to the service departments world as well. Everybody now, you don't have to be kids to have 2 or 3 devices. Everybody now has 2 or 3 devices. So for us, it's making sure that someone in a rented apartment can roam their complex, can go down to the gym, can go to the co-working areas, can go to the amenities and stay connected with their devices. And a much more campus-wide network is required. And it's something we've been pushing a lot in build to rent in particular. I guess apartments in the past, particularly in Ireland, the tenants were left up to their own devices and what internet connections they got. So what you were left with was various different connections right throughout the building. The minute you leave your apartment, you're disconnected and then you're on 4G or on your mobile, whereas a much more centralized, managed connected network. And I think that is now seen as more important than running water at this stage. And that has been because of the pandemic for sure.
And forgive me for being not very tech savvy at all, but how easy is it to physically upgrade these properties and to retrofit existing properties to the latest networks? Is it a very disruptive job?
It's a lot easier than you think because there has been in the 2000s there was a lot of cable put into these buildings, and a lot of cable. You'll find Cat5 data points in bedrooms and living rooms and kitchens almost, because everybody wanted to future-proof. And the reality is that those cables are no longer required, but they are required to enable wireless within an apartment. So for example, if you have 3 or 4 traditional copper Cat5 cables in an apartment in various data points, we can easily intercept one of those and bring it back up and fit an access point, and that's all that's required. Once you have an access point in the optimum position within an apartment, that will take, like the access points, the enterprise standard access points that we put in. We're a Ruckus house, they'll take 500 devices, so that there's no issue with connectivity then. So a retrofit to a building like that is no problem. What we're seeing with the new builds is that we can now save operators and developers a lot of money at the design stage by saying, you don't need this cable, you don't need that cable. This is all that you need. Everything is wireless. Everything is going to go wireless. But as we all know, no matter how tech savvy we are, wireless is only wireless to the end users. So you want your iPad and your laptop and your TV to connect wirelessly, But in order to do that, it's heavily wired in the background. So a good fiber backbone throughout the complex, through the risers and the subcoms areas, and then the last mile can be copper. The last few meters can be copper. So a good fiber backbone, and that's easily retrofitted, and then utilizing existing Cat5 cables into various optimum locations around the building.
Thanks, Leo. Okay, so before we get around to Q&A from the audience, and please do submit your questions, folks, using the Q&A function. We still have time. I just want to ask each of our three panelists in turn where they see their businesses 3 years from now, and what the most significant learning from the pandemic period has been to get them where they need to go. Cindy, could we start with you, please, on that one?
I think flexible living and office spaces and the sharing economy is just going to continue to grow. You know, the consumer wants the product, they see the benefits from it. It enhances their quality of life. It provides more free time. It provides, you know, additional income potential from all these different channels. So I think you're going to see critical mass adoption over the next 5 to 10 years. Right now, where in my world, home sharing is an amenity and it's kind of a novelty, I think it should be a standard where why can't you rent your place when you're not using it? Like there's absolutely no reason why that real estate couldn't be optimized. It's just a long-term behavior change that is going to be impacted, you know, from the consumer level to the government agency level. And so that's a lot of layers for change. But much like Uber, you know, the world wants it. They want it from the driver's perspective, from the user's perspective. You know, it's just a win-win for everybody. So I think this sharing economy is going to apply to almost every facet of our life. So COVID is, I believe, accelerated that adoption because the need for flexibility, not only in housing and accommodations, but also in your office space where you go, well, now I'm working from home and my kids are working from home. Get me out of the house. Like, where can I go? You know, when you don't return back to the office, but you still want some type of semblance, or you want to leave your home, you still want somewhere to go. Like, I think to Laszlo's point, it's a point of connection, those communal areas. I'm tired of walking up and down the stairs and that being my entire day. You know, like you go from your bedroom to your living room and you're in business. And so I think all of these things, you know, are gonna get people more mobilized, more engaged, and, you know, hopefully provide a better quality of living all around. But I think the sharing economy is going to continue to grow. I think, you know, the governments are going to regulate it to a degree where it makes sense. The pendulum's going to probably swing really hard one way, and then it'll come back to middle. But the idea that whether you're a renter or you're an owner, you should have the right within reason to utilize your space, is a concept that resonates, and it's something that people want, and I think will continue that way. So it got accelerated, and now a lot of users that might not have adopted, you know, co-working or co-living or, you know, flexible housing or any of those things are now much more inclined to use it, not only as a temporary solution, but as a long-term a solution for life. So I think it's all good for us.
And specifically with regards to Orion House, you're in the southeast of the US at the moment. Where do you see yourselves geographically 3 years from now?
Geographically, we're working on licensing and franchise models to take this business model and our software solutions internationally. We do have relationships in Western and Eastern Europe, India, South America, Central America. So certainly from the developer's perspective, which is our main growth partner as real estate developers and REITs and family offices that hold a lot of this inventory, you know, I think it's going to continue to grow. We won't likely leave the States as a company in the sense of having feet on the ground there, but we do want to take our business model and be able to share it, similar to how a hotel would flag, but just say, look, here's how it works. here's how you lease, here's how you operate, here's how you collect taxes, here's how you remit taxes, here's how you do your permitting, like all of the logistical stuff of taking what is traditional multifamily and combining that hybrid with hotel. That's where the rubber meets the road. And so, you know, giving that playbook and licensing that out and providing the supporting technology and integrations, I think, you know, that's where our future growth is. But as it relates to the US, you know, we look at the Southwest as our next geography that we'll be hitting. So Arizona, New Mexico, and California.
Great stuff. Thank you, Cindy. László, what's been your key learning from the pandemic, and where do you see your company in 3 years' time?
Yeah, what we've seen as well is sort of this, you know, just the fact that I'm sitting here speaking on a webinar that's dedicated to hospitality, right? I mean, that kind of gives part of the answer already. Like 3 years ago, these were very different industries, and these were completely sort of separated silos. And today, you know, from the client perspective, they look at real estate as a service, and it's almost like in their heads, sort of co-working, shared office space, co-living is just sort of this one big ball that they want to sort of explore and get into. So, you know, we get a lot of requests from clients who are coming for office space, like, oh, you guys also have apartments, so you guys have service, you know, like apartments for 60 of our employees that are arriving next month in Lisbon, right? You get a lot of this. So I think there is going to be definitely like a lot of continued convergence, and ultimately, right, like in any industry, there's going to be some consolidation. There's going to be, right, like some brands who are going to prevail and go international or even global. So yeah, and I think that's kind of what we see for ourselves as well. I mean, we've sort of started very small and very humble in Lisbon, as I mentioned to you before the call as well. We've always looked at whatever we did, every one of our units in and of itself had to be a sort of viable business that's turning its own profit. So we never had the sort of megalomaniac, again, sort of venture capital fueled expansion of just gobbling up real estate for the sake of it. And I think we'll continue to grow that way. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. We are looking at some rural co-working, for example, in Portugal. So there's definitely been a demand for that as well. So post the pandemic, I think everybody just wants more of the, you know, the seaside, the mountains, the lakes, all of just reconnecting with nature. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity. And Portugal, right, everyone sort of thinks of it as the California of Europe, and there's just a lot of opportunities for that aren't yet fully explored, and we are starting to look at some of those opportunities. And then, you know, the obvious sort of geographic locations of Spain and France and potentially even London. Let's see, there's some conversations, but early days still.
So in an ideal world, what would be the top 5 locations on your wish list?
I haven't thought about this one, but well, let me just improvise right now. I'd say, you know, Barcelona for sure, maybe somewhere like, you know, Marseille along the south coast of France, you know, Berlin because it's Berlin, and London because it's London. And I think there is this sort of, you know, European synergy as well that we can tap into. There's a lot of people in London who would love to be, you know, sitting in sunny Lisbon right now and spend sort of a couple of weeks working out of here and have a network, have sort of a more European network that they can tap into, both for co-working and for co-living solutions.
Sounds pretty good to me right now, if you look at well, we haven't got blue sky now. It's Leo, where will IMS be in 3 years, and what's the most important thing you've learned throughout the pandemic?
Well, I think I'd like to be in the California of Europe. I haven't heard that expression before. László, I'm coming to visit you soon. Yeah, to be honest, Portugal is an area actually that we're looking at projects in the pipeline in Lisbon and Porto. So that's with 2 of our clients. The cities that László mentioned, we've got properties in Berlin, London, and Marseille. Haven't been to Barcelona yet, but yeah, hopefully, like what we offer can be done in any city in Europe, and so we intend to keep growing. We opened a London office recently, so and we keep, I guess we want to diversify our portfolio as well, and we see build to rent and co-living and co-working as future areas of growth for us, in parallel with the shorter let and the traditional hospitality and student accommodation markets. So yeah, onwards and upwards, George.
Thanks, Leo. We've got a question in here for Cindy from Ernest Oriente. Thanks for your question, Ernest. And he asked, have you got any comments on extra costs, fees or deposits tied to inventory as a result of pandemic defaults?
As a result of pandemic defaults, any extra costs, fees, deposits? Not for us. You know, our business, because we don't have the master lease model, we didn't get in a situation of defaults from either our renters, because they're individual leaseholders, and there were different financial instruments from the government that kept, you know, their ability to pay. But also as it relates to just extra costs, fees or deposits for the short-term rental program, we don't have any upfront costs that are required. There is a 25% fee that is paid out of the nightly rate to ownership and to our company from the management perspective, but that's only off of earned income from short-term rentals. So there's no additional cost to be a part of the program. There's no additional fees or deposits, but if you earn, a portion of the revenue will stay with us to service the apartment and the building and the guest. And that's for fully serviced unit inventory. We do have a software solution where it's not fully serviced, which is a smaller portion of that income. But if you put your inventory into our home sharing pool and we run it entirely for you, there's a 25% commission on earned income on the nightly rate.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. And thanks to László and Leo also. It's been a really interesting session. Obviously, all three of our panelists coming from very different angles, but experiencing some similar threads in driving and growing their businesses. I'm just going to share my screen for a moment just to show you guys a few slides before we wrap up. So our next Urban Living webinar is next Wednesday, the 17th, and the link to sign up for that is in the chat, and it's all about co-living. It's a fascinating subject, and it's one which is increasingly converging with other asset classes, as we've heard from some of our speakers today. Now, we've got a great live event taking place in Paris in January. It's called Recharge. It moves around various European cities. We've done them now in Amsterdam, Berlin, and Barcelona. There's lots of information on the event website, which you'll see in the chat. It's limited to 120 attendees. It's a really interactive group of sessions about the convergence of hospitality and real estate asset classes. It's a great event. It's really good fun, and people who come along leave as friends, and they really stay in touch. It's a great cooperative event, so do check that out. Here are some of our sponsors for the event, as you can see there. If you're interested in taking part, please do get in touch with my colleague Katie, whose contact details are there and also in the chat. And thanks for your time today. Thanks for watching. If you're on any of these social channels, give us a follow and get involved. We're quite active on all of those. Thanks again to László, to Cindy, and to Leo, to you guys for watching. We're going to leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can take some notes from all the information that's in the chat. To our panelists, no need to stay on if you don't want to now, or you can mute yourselves. But if you need to get any of this info there, if not, I'll see you all soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.